Dear students, we will be focusing on this module on the projections of labor force, population, the households and student groups. In this way, the major components of population in terms of the working population, in terms of the students population and also the number of households, they are very vital as it has implications for various policies and programs. Let us start with the labor force projections of population. The labor force projections are estimated by combining population projections with the labor force participation rate projections as developed by BLS. Consequently, the growth of the labor force is the result of simultaneous changes in the civilian non-institutional population, and the labor force participation rates of the various gender, age, race and Hispanic origin groups are referred in this projections. According to the Census Bureau's 2012 population projections, the US population is expected to continue to grow slowly and to become more racially and ethnically diverse. During the period 2012 to 2022, the growth of the labor force is anticipated to be due entirely to population growth, as the overall labor force participation is expected to decrease from 63.7% in 2012 to 61.6% in 2022. The table clearly depicts the civilian labor force and with respect to age, gender and ethnicity during different points of time starting from 1992, 2002, 2012 and projected for 2022, and it is expressed for different groups, and also the data that clearly reveals is that variations are clearly depicted. For instance, since starting from the track of the labor force participation rate, that is the proportion of civilian non-institutional population that is in the labor force, in 1948 the rate has trended toward upward until the late 1990s, and when it peaked, and it has further declined since then. After increasing in the 70s, 80s and 90s, the participation rate reached and maintained an all-time high of 67.51% over the period of 97 to 2000. Then, counter to its behavior in previous economic downturns, in which it would soon return to its pre-recession levels, the labor force participation rate continued to decline following the 2001 recession, after which it held steadily at about 66% during 2004 to 2008. Subsequently, during the period 2007 to 9 recession, the overall labor force participation rate fell by 0.6 percentage point from 66.0% to 65.4%. Then in 2010, the rate came to 64.7%, a further decrease of 0.7 percentage point. By 2012, the participation rate had fallen another 1% to 63.7%. Of note is the fact that the drop in the labor force participation rate was just 0.6 percentage during 2007 to 9 economic downturn, whereas between 2009 to 2012, since the end of the recession, the rate declined by another 1.7 percentage points. A major factor responsible for this downward pressure on the overall labor force participation rate is the aging of the baby boom generation, as explained in the figure 1. The figure 1 clearly depicts the labor force participation rates during 1947 to 2012 and further projected to 2022. By multiplying the projected labor force participation rates of each group by the Census Bureau's most recent population projections, the labor supply for each category and for the economy as a whole is projected. The main role of BLS in projecting the labor force is to estimate future participation rates. In what follows, past population trends, in addition to population projections of all the different gender, age, race and ethnic categories, are examined first. Next, past trends in the labor force participation rates and projected rates for the period 2012 to 2022 period are discussed. Then the projected level and growth rate of the labor force over the next decade is analyzed, and finally, various aspects of the aging labor force are studied. Now, let us discuss about the projections of labor households. The households projections are trend based and clearly indicate the number of additional households that would form if recent demographic trends continue. We can find out more about the methodology used and the accuracy of the data projections in household projections, that is on notes and definitions for data analysts. The projections are a demographic projections informed by the projected population as produced by the Office of National Statistics and projected household representative rates informed by census and labor force survey data. Household projections are therefore driven by assumptions on future levels of fertility, mortality and net migration and household formation behavior, that is, how this population groups into household units as measured by household representative rates. The Department for Communities and Local Government have developed an experimental application where users can access key local authority data from the 2011 based interim household projections through interactive maps and charts. This guidance is to be read in conjunction with the series of household projections, which includes the latest statistical releases on household projections. The current methodology in England reflects work to improve the household projections outputs and methods to better meet user needs. This work culminated in a technical consultation about proposed changes to the national statistics on household projections in March 2010. Let us begin with the definition of a household. For the household projections and mid-year estimates, a household defined as one person living alone or a group of people not necessarily related, living at the same address with a common housekeeping, that is, sharing a living room or sitting room or at least one meal a day. For the 2011 census, the definition of a household was adopted to reflect recent social changes and living conditions, but for the 2011 interim projections, it was assumed thus that this did not affect household formation at the aggregate level. Projections of the number of households. The household figures for England and its local authority districts are derived by the Department for Communities and Local Government from the household projections model using sub-national population figures from the Office for National Statistics. Generally, the sub-national population projections are updated every other year following the publication of updated mid-year estimates of population, but occasionally an interim set of projections are produced to meet user needs. For example, after census results are published. The 2011 based projections are interim because they are based on the 2011 based interim sub-national population projections. These population projections are based on the 2011 mid-year population estimates rolled forward from the census 2011 data and apply the demographic trends used for the previous 2010 based sub-national population projections. An estimate of the communal establishment population is subtracted from the total population to give the private household population. These population figures, split by age, sex and marital status groups, are multiplied by the projected household representative rates that represent the proportion of the population in that category who are household representatives. These rates are based on the 71, 81, 91, 2001 and 2011 censuses and labor force survey data. The breakdown of the household projections into the detailed household types is given by a projection of headship rates from 2001 and 2011 census. Figures for the number of households for 2011 are derived from household representative rates applied to the ONS mid-year population estimates for 2011. They are therefore not direct estimates of the actual number of households as they are derived from modeled household representative rates. A more detailed description of the projection methodology is available in updating the Department for Communities and Local Governments household projections to a 2011 base that is published on 9th April 2013. Let us focus on contribution to growth. The analysis on the effect of population change and household formation on household growth as presented in the table on household projection shows changes in the population contributed for about 98% of the growth in household formation, whereas changes in household formation contributed about 3% of household growth. These two elements do not add up to 100% because there is an interaction effect. In terms of the quality, as the population projections are a key component of the household projections, the Office for National Statistics generally publishes a set of variant national population projections showing the effect on the population projections of different assumptions on fertility, life expectancy and net migration, and variant household projections. We give a broad indication of the sensitivity of the projections to these demographic assumptions. There are no variant projections available for the interim 2011 based sub-national population projections, so no variant projections have been produced for the consistent 2011 interim household projections. In order to provide a sense of the sensitivity of the 2011 based interim household projections to changes in population, an analytical exercise has been done by applying the household formation rates from the 2011 interim household projections to the 2008 based sub-national population projections. Let us discuss about historic series and archive figures. The data for 1861 to 1961 are largely based on the census figures for England and Wales, with Wales including Monmouthshire excluded to maintain an area consistent with modern England. The figures up to till 1921 use families and separate occupiers and have not been adjusted to take account of the definitional change in 1921 that effectively removed the institutional population from the figures. The figure for 1939 is based on work by A. E. Holmans as cited in Housing Policy in Britain in 1987, Broomhelm, with a pro rata adjustment made for England using the population ratio. Previous projections from this century have been replaced by the 2011 based interim projections, but information about these can be found from various references listed in the module. Now let us focus on based on these figures for England to 2008 are based on ONS mid-year population estimates and projected rates of household formation from trends in census and labour force survey data. Other data sources such as the labour force survey provide direct sample survey estimates of the number of households in each year and therefore may differ from the model based figures shown here. Figures from 2002-2008 have been revised to be consistent with revised mid-year population estimates for these years, and figures from 1991 have been updated in line with the methodology used for the 2008 based projections. Household estimates for Wales from 1991 to 2007 were revised in 2009 August to provide a back series consistent with the methodology changes adopted for the 2006 based projections. Northern Ireland figures are census counts from 1961 to 2001, 2008 based projections for 2008 onwards. All projections are 2008 based. Data for earlier years may not follow the consistent definitions. Let us discuss now in detail about the projection of student population. India will be home to the largest domestic higher education market by 2025, while China will remain the #1 provider of international students globally, according to a study from the British Council. India will have the largest 18 to 22-year-old population in 10 years, that is to the extent of 119 million population. The next biggest group will be in China, despite the projection that the number of Chinese in this age group will decline by roughly 35 million to 80 million. In 2012, China's student population was 11.5 million, overtaking India's by 71,000. Nigeria will see the highest increase in this youth population, projected at about 7.4 million to reach 23 million in 2025. Other countries that will have much bigger student populations over the next decade includes Indonesia up to 3.7 million and Ethiopia up to 3.6 million. This is based in the report The Shape of International Education to 2025 that predicts the African youth population will equal and then surpass the Asian youth population sometime around 2078. This study is part of British Council's Shape of Things to Come series and will be presented at its annual Services for International Education Marketing Conference in Edinburgh on 10th December. The British Council worked with Oxford Economics to develop demographic and economic projections using data from the United Nations Population Division and the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. The report adds that the trend of the US and the UK facing decreases in their global market share of international students looks set to continue as the provision of education in traditional origin countries expands. It suggests that Sri Lanka will see the highest annual percentage growth in household income over the next decade, 5.8% per annum, while strong average annual growth is also forecast in Vietnam 5.5%, Uzbekistan 5.3%, China 5.1%, Bangladesh 4.7% and Indonesia 4.3%. Based on figures for household wealth and population projections as well as trends in tertiary education, the British Council predicts that China will continue to be the top supplier of international students globally by 2025, followed by India, Nigeria, Germany and Saudi Arabia, while India will be home to the largest domestic higher education market, followed by China and the US. A separate report published by the UK Higher Education International Unit this week revealed that a higher proportion of international students would recommend the UK than any of its major English-speaking competitors. As reported in the study International Undergraduate Students, the UK's competitive advantage show that international undergraduate student satisfaction with UK higher education is at 91%, while 85% of international undergraduates would recommend or actively recommend their UK study experience. The findings are based on feedback from international students on courses outside their home country, which was collected by iGraduate's International Student Barometers, collected from iGraduate's International Students Barometer. India will be number 1 in 7 years. Within the next 7 years, India will overtake China to become the world's most populous country. In just a year or two after that, once China's population has hit around 1,441.5 million people, its population will start to decline for the first time ever. India, meanwhile, will continue to grow until 2061 or so and only start to decline when its population has gone well past 1,678.7 million people, when it will be the most populous country the world has ever seen. By that point, will be a significantly grayer country. India's median age will have crossed 40 by the time its population finally starts declining. The median age today is only 27 years. The beginning of the end of the demographic dividend. By 2040 or so, India's demographic dividend will be conclusively over. Being a relatively young country, India has a low dependence ratio, the ratio of children and the elderly to the working age population. Once fertility began to slow down, the dependence ratio began to fall from the 1970s and the share of the working population in the total population grew, becoming a huge potential growth for India. But as the population grows, India's dependence ratio will rise again, and that change becomes evident by 2040 or so. So, if India wants to use its global competitive advantage in having a large working age population, it has around 20 years to do this. Perhaps the most significant demographic change is the falling number of children every family in India is having. That is the total fertility rate, which is already down to 2.3 children for every woman. And the projections clearly shows that it is expected to reach the replacement fertility rate, that is the number of children required to simply replace the existing population without its growing, of 2.1 by 2025. Most people commonly believe that having fewer children and being better educated means that women are having their children later than ever, and hence the mean age at childbearing should be falling in India. However, what is actually happening is the opposite, that is, the age at which a woman has her first child is indeed going up. But women are having fewer children, not so much by having them later, but by still having them relatively early and then stopping having them. No more having fifth or sixth child well into their 40s years for Indian women. So, counterintuitively, the mean age at childbirth, that is the average age at which a woman has all her children, is actually falling in India. That finally changes around 2025 when women start to have children later and the mean age of childbirth starts to rise. Let us focus on sex ratio. Sometime around now, India's sex ratio is projected to finally start improving. After 2020, India's sex ratio at birth, that is, the number of male births for every female birth, is projected to finally start declining. Just a handful of countries have a worse sex ratio at birth as of 2015 to 2020, such as China, Armenia and Azerbaijan. Another important change that is taking place is that the inexplicably high number of baby girls dying before they reach the age of 5, and that is also slowing down, and male and female child mortality is falling and is at a similar rates now. In that way, the difference between male and female variation has come to the minimal. The table clearly depicts the summary of historical and projected public school enrollment for a country like Maryland, and for the different years starting from the year base population of 2006 to actual of 2011 and projected for different periods of time like 2016, 2021 and 2026. The data clearly reveals with respect to the actual school ratio, the total enrollment, and in terms of elementary, the middle and high, and also the change in enrollment by school type for selected years is also presented for different indicators. And these data clearly reveals how the changes are occurring in terms of the enrollment, and that way the school data also can be projected. Overall, in this module, we are able to have a reasonably understanding of the population projections in terms of the projected households, the projections for school population, and also the projections for the labor force. So, the data which is very important in various socio-economic levels of living is derived from these projections, and the trends were clearly reveals that over a period these changes how with respect to the variations across different regions over a period of time, and the projections gives enough clues for the policy makers and program managers interested and involved in the various activities related to the labor force, the households data, and also the student population in terms of the education sector. This data, projected data, plays a very important role for making to enhance the lives of these segments of population.